The rain had started just before closing time, turning the streets of downtown Boston into a blur of shimmering lights and hurried footsteps. Inside Harbor Street Bistro, the warm glow of hanging lamps wrapped the small restaurant in comfort, while the last few customers finished their meals. 27-year-old Emily Carter moved quietly between the tables, balancing a tray of empty coffee cups with the effortless grace she'd learned after years of working double shifts. Her smile was genuine, but the tiredness in her hazel eyes told a different story. Every tip she earned went toward paying her late mother's medical debts and keeping the tiny apartment she now called home. Tonight had been unusually slow. Most of the customers had already left when the front door opened one final time. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a charcoal overcoat darkened by the rain. His clothes were elegant without being flashy, and there was something strangely familiar about the calm confidence in the way he carried himself. He chose the table by the window and ordered nothing more than a bowl of soup and black coffee. For nearly an hour, he barely touched his food. Instead, he stared through the rain-covered glass as if waiting for someone who never arrived. Emily noticed him several times, but respected his silence. When he finally stood to leave, he placed a generous tip beneath the receipt, nodded politely, and disappeared into the storm before she could even thank him. It wasn't until she cleared the table that she saw it. A beautiful vintage wristwatch. Its silver case reflected the restaurant lights like liquid moonlight. The leather strap was worn with age, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. This wasn't an ordinary watch. Turning it over, Emily noticed a tiny engraving on the back. To Daniel, time never forgets those who choose kindness. Her heart skipped. There was no brand name, no phone number, no address, only those mysterious words. She hurried outside into the rain. "Sir," she called, scanning the nearly empty street. Nothing. The stranger had vanished. Emily looked down at the watch resting in her trembling hands, completely unaware that returning it would pull her into a story involving a forgotten promise, a hidden fortune, and a man whose name appeared on the front page of newspapers across the country. By the time the sun rose the next morning, her ordinary life would never be ordinary again. Emily barely slept that night. The antique watch lay on the small wooden table beside her bed, catching the pale glow of the streetlight that slipped through her apartment window. Every time she closed her eyes, the engraved words echoed in her mind. Time never forgets those who choose kindness. Who was Daniel? Why would someone carry such a valuable watch and simply leave it behind? And why did it feel as though it had somehow found its way into her life for a reason? She reached for her phone, hoping someone might have called the restaurant asking about a missing watch. Nothing. With a quiet sigh, she slipped the watch back into the small velvet pouch she had found in her dresser, placed it carefully inside her handbag, and prepared for another ordinary day. Or at least, she thought it would be. By 7 o'clock that morning, the streets of Boston were already alive. Office workers hurried toward towering glass buildings with takeaway coffees in their hands. Yellow taxis filled the intersections. Delivery trucks lined the narrow streets while the city slowly shook itself awake. Emily stood waiting at the bus stop, wrapping her thin gray coat tightly around herself against the cold autumn wind. She wasn't thinking about the weather. She was calculating bills. Rent was due in 5 days. The electricity payment was already overdue. Her younger brother Noah had called the previous evening saying his college textbooks had become more expensive than expected. Emily had promised she would somehow help him. She always kept her promises, even when she had no idea how. The old city bus arrived with its familiar hiss. Emily climbed aboard, greeted the elderly driver with a warm smile, and quietly took her usual seat beside the window. She spent the 20-minute journey looking at photographs on her phone. One showed her late mother laughing while flour covered her face as they baked cinnamon rolls together. Another showed 14-year-old Noah proudly holding his first football trophy. Emily smiled for a moment before locking the screen. Some memories made her stronger. Others simply reminded her of everything she had lost. Harbor Street Bistro wasn't a famous restaurant. It sat quietly on a corner overlooking the harbor, where tourists mixed with office workers and the occasional wealthy visitor who preferred privacy over luxury. The owner, Mr. Harrison, believed one thing above everything else. People may forget the food, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Emily had never forgotten those words. As soon as she tied on her navy blue apron, she greeted every customer as though they were guests in her own home. She remembered birthdays, favorite coffee orders, children's names, even the elderly gentleman who came every Wednesday afternoon simply to have someone to talk to. Many customers returned because of her kindness, not because of the menu, yet few of them knew the truth. After every shift ended, Emily walked 3 extra blocks to a small community center where she volunteered twice a week, serving dinner to elderly residents who had no family nearby. She never posted about it online. She never told anyone. To her, kindness wasn't something you announced. It was simply something you did. Around midday, the restaurant became busy. Orders flew into the kitchen, coffee machines hissed without stopping, plates disappeared from the counter as quickly as they appeared. Emily moved from table to table with effortless calm, smiling even when customers complained or rushed her. A young mother struggled to calm her crying toddler. Before anyone noticed, Emily disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a warm chocolate chip cookie. "Would it be all right if our youngest guest tried today's special dessert?" she asked with a playful smile. Within seconds, the little boy stopped crying. His exhausted mother laughed for the first time all day. Moments like these reminded Emily why she loved serving people, not because of the tips, because sometimes one small act of kindness could completely change someone's day. She had no idea that before this shift was over, someone would walk through the restaurant doors searching for a watch and unknowingly begin changing her entire future. The afternoon rush had finally settled. For the first time in hours, Harbor Street Bistro grew quiet again. The soft melody of an old jazz song drifted through the speakers, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Emily stood behind the counter, absent-mindedly polishing a wine glass. Yet her thoughts were nowhere near the restaurant. They kept returning to the watch. Hidden safely inside her handbag, the vintage timepiece felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried a story waiting to be told. She glanced at the entrance every few minutes. Maybe he'll come back. Surely anyone who owned something that valuable would realize it was missing. An hour passed, then another. Still no sign of the mysterious stranger. Just after 3 o'clock, the restaurant door opened. Emily looked up immediately. For a brief second, her heart skipped. But it wasn't him. Instead, an elderly gentleman stepped inside, leaning on a polished wooden cane. He wore a neatly pressed navy coat and carried himself with quiet dignity. He smiled warmly as Emily approached. "Good afternoon," she said. "May I help you?" The old man looked around before asking softly, "I heard someone may have found a watch here last night." Emily's eyes widened. "Yes." She hesitated. "What does it look like?" Instead of answering, the man smiled. "A fair question." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a faded photograph. It showed 3 young men standing beside an old sailing boat nearly 40 years earlier. One of them wore the exact same watch. Emily looked carefully. The smiling man in the center had kind eyes, the same calm expression, the same posture. He looked remarkably similar to the stranger from the previous evening. "I know him," Emily whispered. "Well," the old gentleman replied, "I used to." Those words landed strangely. Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" The man lowered his eyes. "I haven't seen Daniel in almost 25 years. Emily invited him to sit near the window. She brought him a cup of tea without charging him. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the old man looked toward the rain outside. "Daniel wasn't interested in wealth when we were young." He chuckled quietly. "He wanted to build boats, travel the world, help people." "What happened?" Emily asked. The man's smile slowly disappeared. "Life happened." There was sadness in his voice. "He disappeared from everyone who loved him." Emily listened carefully. "But surely someone knows where he is now." The old gentleman gave a slow nod. "Oh, many people know his name." Emily looked confused. "But very few know the man." Before she could ask another question, his phone began ringing. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. "I'm sorry," he said, standing. "I have to leave." Emily reached into her handbag and carefully removed the antique watch. "If you know him, please, take this back to him." The old man stared at the watch for several silent seconds. Then, to Emily's surprise, he gently pushed it back toward her. "No." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" "If Daniel wanted someone else to return this watch..." He smiled with quiet certainty. "Then it wasn't meant for me." Before Emily could stop him, he slipped a small business card onto the table. "If he doesn't return within 3 days, come to this address." She looked down at the card. There was no company logo, no job title, only an elegant name embossed in silver. Arthur Bennett, and beneath it, "Private estate, by appointment." Only Emily looked back toward the door. The old man was already gone. She hurried outside, but the pavement was empty. No taxi, no footsteps, nothing. Only the cold autumn wind. Returning inside, she turned the business card over. On the back, written neatly in blue ink, was a single sentence. "Some treasures aren't lost by accident." Emily felt a chill run through her body. She looked at the watch again. For the first time, she wasn't wondering how to return it. She was beginning to wonder whether it had been left behind on purpose. Emily barely noticed the rest of her shift. Arthur Bennett's business card remained tucked safely inside her apron pocket, but it felt as though it weighed 100 pounds. Every few minutes she touched it, making sure it was still there. "Some treasures aren't lost by accident." The words refused to leave her mind. When the restaurant finally closed that evening, Mr. Harrison locked the front door and looked over at Emily, who was absent-mindedly wiping the same table for the 3rd time. "You've cleaned that table enough to make it brand new," he joked. Emily forced a smile. "I'm sorry. You've been distracted all day." She hesitated before taking the antique watch from her handbag. "I found this after closing last night." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and carefully examined it under the restaurant lights. His expression changed almost immediately. "This isn't just expensive," he whispered. "It's incredibly rare." "You recognize it?" Not the watch. He gently turned it over. The engraving. Emily leaned closer. You've seen it before? Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. Years ago. There used to be a charity gala held every winter at the Grand Harbor Hotel. Some of the most influential business leaders in New England attended. He paused, studying the engraved words. I remember seeing a man wearing this exact watch. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Was his name Daniel? Mr. Harrison looked surprised. I never met him personally, but everyone in that room seemed to know who he was. What did he do? The restaurant owner shrugged. No one really knew. Some people called him an investor. Others said he owned shipping companies. I even heard someone say he quietly donated millions to children's hospitals. Emily frowned. So, he was wealthy. Mr. Harrison smiled. Wealthy? He let out a soft laugh. If the rumors were true, he wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in the country. Emily stared silently at the watch. The stranger who had ordered nothing more than soup and coffee, the man who had thanked her with nothing but a quiet smile, could he really be someone that important? It didn't seem possible. There had been no bodyguards, no expensive jewelry, no arrogance, just a lonely man sitting by the rain-covered window. Something didn't fit. That night, Emily couldn't ignore her curiosity any longer. After arriving home, she opened her old laptop and typed a single word into the search bar. Daniel. Thousands of results appeared. Actors, doctors, athletes, authors. Nothing seemed connected. She added another word. Daniel Boston watch. Still nothing useful. She sighed and leaned back in her chair. Maybe Arthur had been wrong. Maybe Mr. Harrison had mistaken someone else for the stranger. Just as she was about to close the laptop, her eyes caught a small article buried near the bottom of the page. The Daniel Whitmore Foundation donates £50 million to children's medical research. Emily clicked it. A photograph slowly appeared on the screen. Her breath caught. It was him. The same calm eyes, the same composed expression, the same man who had quietly eaten soup in a restaurant. Only now he was standing in front of a hospital, surrounded by cameras, shaking hands with government officials. The headline beneath the photograph read, Daniel Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Global Holdings. Emily's heart pounded. She searched the company name. Within seconds, article after article filled the screen. International shipping, luxury hotels, renewable energy, technology investments. One headline estimated his personal fortune at over £18 billion. Emily stared at the number in disbelief. 18 billion? She whispered the words as if saying them too loudly would make them real. Her mind drifted back to the previous evening. She remembered the way he had quietly thanked her, the sadness in his eyes, the untouched bowl of soup, and then she remembered something else. When he had stood to leave, he hadn't looked at the door first. He had looked at the watch, almost as though he had known exactly where he was leaving it. A sudden knock echoed through the quiet apartment. Emily jumped. Nobody ever visited this late. Another knock, this one louder. She slowly walked to the door. Who is it? She asked cautiously. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a calm, unfamiliar voice answered from the hallway. Miss Carter, we need to speak about Daniel Whitmore. Emily's hand froze on the doorknob. How did this stranger know her name? And more importantly, how did they know she had the watch? Emily's hand rested on the doorknob, but she didn't move. The stranger outside had spoken calmly, almost politely, yet there was something unsettling about hearing her own name from someone she'd never met. Who are you? She asked through the closed door. A brief silence followed. My name is Victoria Hale, the woman replied. I work for Mr. Daniel Whitmore. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel Whitmore, the name she'd only discovered an hour earlier. She slowly looked through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in a dark navy business suit. Her silver-gray coat was neatly buttoned despite the cold, and a leather folder rested under one arm. She didn't look dangerous. She looked professional. Still, Emily kept the security chain fastened before opening the door a few inches. How did you find me? Emily asked cautiously. Victoria offered a small, respectful smile. The restaurant owner told us where to find you. Emily frowned. Mr. Harrison, he was concerned after several people came asking about the watch today. Several people? Victoria nodded. You're not the only one searching for Mr. Whitmore. Emily remained silent. Something didn't feel right. If you work for him, she said carefully, why didn't he come himself? For the first time, Victoria hesitated. Her confident expression softened. Because he can't. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. What do you mean? Victoria looked down for a moment before answering. Mr. Whitmore has been missing for 36 hours. The words struck Emily like a wave. Missing? Victoria gave a slow nod. He left his office yesterday morning. He canceled every meeting, turned off his phone, and disappeared. Emily struggled to process what she was hearing. But I saw him. He was at Harbor Street Bistro. Victoria looked directly into her eyes. We know. Emily froze. You know? We reviewed the restaurant's security footage. You were the last person confirmed to have spoken with him. A cold chill ran through Emily. For a brief moment, she wondered if they suspected her. Victoria seemed to notice the fear on her face. Please don't misunderstand. You're not in any trouble. In fact, we believe you may be the only person who can help us understand why he disappeared. Emily slowly opened the door wider and invited Victoria inside. The apartment was small but spotless. A worn-out sofa faced a tiny bookshelf. Family photographs covered one wall. Victoria noticed them immediately. Your mother? Emily nodded quietly. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Victoria spoke with genuine sympathy before turning her attention back to the reason she'd come. The watch. Emily walked to the kitchen table and carefully placed the antique timepiece between them. Victoria stared at it without touching it. Her expression changed, almost emotional. I haven't seen this in years, she whispered. You recognize it? Victoria smiled sadly. It belonged to Daniel's father. Emily looked surprised. He never takes it off. Never. Then why would he leave it behind? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently traced the engraved words with her fingertips. Time never forgets those who choose kindness. My grandfather engraved those words, she said softly. He made this watch for Daniel's father over 50 years ago. Emily's curiosity grew stronger. So, it's a family heirloom. Victoria nodded. It has been passed from father to son for 3 generations. Emily looked back at the watch in disbelief. If it's that important, then he would never leave it by accident. Victoria slowly met her eyes. No, he wouldn't. The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the old kitchen clock could be heard. Finally, Emily asked the question that had been troubling her all evening. If he didn't lose it, why did he leave it? Victoria took a slow breath. That's exactly what we've been trying to figure out. Before Emily could respond, Victoria reached into her leather folder and removed a sealed white envelope. Across the front, written in elegant black handwriting, were just 4 words. For the kind waitress. Emily stared at it in stunned silence. Daniel left this with his solicitor 6 months ago, Victoria said. It was only to be delivered if someone returned the watch. Emily looked up, completely speechless. But he didn't even know me. Victoria's eyes filled with quiet uncertainty. That's the strange part. She slid the envelope across the table. He wrote your name. 3 months before you ever met him. Emily stared at the cream-colored envelope lying on her kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly. Across the front, written in elegant black ink, were the words, "For the kind waitress." She looked up at Victoria. I've never met Daniel before yesterday. Victoria nodded. I know. Then how could he possibly know my name? I wish I had the answer. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rattled the apartment windows while the old kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background. Finally, Victoria spoke again. You should open it. Emily carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The paper had yellowed slightly, as though it had been written months earlier. She unfolded it. The letter, if you're reading this, then one of 2 things has happened. Either I have finally found the courage to face my past, or life has chosen the moment for me. Emily exchanged a confused glance with Victoria before continuing. You don't know me. At least, you don't believe you do. But kindness has a strange way of bringing people back together. Emily frowned. Back together? She had never seen this man before. Or had she? She kept reading. If you return my father's watch instead of selling it, then you are exactly the person I hoped still existed in this world. Please don't let anyone take the watch from you. Not until you learn why it found you. Emily slowly lowered the letter. It found me. She whispered the words aloud. Victoria remained silent. Even she looked unsettled. Emily turned the page over. A photograph slipped onto the table. It showed a little girl standing beside an older woman in front of a small seaside bakery. The picture looked at least 20 years old. The little girl couldn't have been older than 7. She wore a blue coat, 2 messy braids, and a bright smile despite the rain. Emily's breath caught. No. Her fingers tightened around the photograph. That's impossible. Victoria leaned forward. What is it? Emily couldn't answer. She simply pointed at the little girl. That's me. Victoria's eyes widened. What? Emily hurried to a nearby bookshelf. She pulled down an old family photo album. Her hands moved frantically through faded photographs until she found one taken on her 8th birthday. She placed it beside the picture from the envelope. Same blue coat, same braids, same smile. Even the tiny star-shaped hair clip was identical. There was no doubt. The child in Daniel's photograph was Emily. Victoria looked genuinely shaken. This shouldn't be possible. Emily's voice barely rose above a whisper. Where did he get this? Victoria slowly shook her head. I've worked with Daniel for 12 years. I've never seen this photograph before. Emily looked back at the letter. Her heart raced as she continued reading. You probably don't remember that rainy afternoon. Children rarely remember the moments that quietly change someone else's life. But I have remembered every single day. Emily stopped breathing. A memory, faint, blurred, almost forgotten. Rain, a bakery, a man sitting alone on a bench, a broken umbrella, a frightened little girl. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. Something was there, hidden deep inside her memory, but she couldn't quite reach it. Victoria noticed the change in Emily's expression. You remembered something. Emily nodded slowly. Not everything. Just pieces. The rain. A bakery. And she closed her eyes. There was a man. He looked heartbroken. Victoria's face turned pale. She whispered almost to herself, My God, it really was you. Emily opened her eyes. What are you talking about? Victoria took a slow breath. There was a story Daniel told only once. It happened 20 years ago. He said that after losing both his wife and unborn child in a terrible car accident, he was ready to end everything. Emily stared at her. But before he walked away, a little girl walked up to him. The apartment seemed to fall completely silent. Victoria's voice trembled. The girl smiled, handed him the last cinnamon roll she'd been saving, and said, My mummy says sad people should never eat alone. Emily's eyes filled with tears. The memory crashed back all at once. The bakery, her mother, the lonely man on the bench, the cinnamon roll wrapped in a paper napkin. She remembered running across the pavement because her mother had whispered, Go on, sweetheart, sometimes the smallest kindness can save a life. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. Victoria looked directly at her. You didn't just return Daniel Whitmore's watch? She paused, emotion breaking through her professional composure. 20 years ago, you unknowingly gave him a reason to keep living. Emily remained frozen, the faded photograph trembling between her fingers. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't even notice them. 20 years. For 20 years, she had carried no memory of that rainy afternoon. Yet for Daniel Whitmore, it had become the day that divided his life into before and after. Victoria quietly folded her hands. I've worked beside Daniel for over a decade, she said softly. I've seen him negotiate billion-pound mergers without blinking. I've watched world leaders ask for his advice. She paused. But I've never seen him speak about anything the way he spoke about that little girl. Emily looked down at the photograph again. I was only 7. Victoria smiled sadly. Sometimes children do what adults have forgotten how to do. Emily slowly walked toward the old bookshelf in the corner of her apartment. On the highest shelf rested a worn cardboard box. Its edges had faded with time, and a thin layer of dust covered the lid. She hadn't opened it since her mother's funeral. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Then, with trembling hands, she lifted the box onto the dining table. Victoria remained silent. She understood some memories deserved quiet. Emily removed the lid. Inside were dozens of small pieces of her childhood. A stuffed rabbit with one missing button eye, old birthday cards, school certificates, crayon drawings, a tiny pair of ballet shoes. Everything smelled faintly of lavender, her mother's favorite scent. Emily smiled through her tears. My mum kept everything. She continued searching until she found an old leather-bound journal. The cover had cracked with age. Inside, neat handwriting filled every page. Her mother's diary. Emily hesitated. I've never been able to read it. Victoria looked at her gently. Maybe tonight is the right time. Emily slowly opened the first page. For several minutes, she quietly turned through stories of birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, and family holidays. Then, a pressed autumn leaf slipped from between 2 pages. It landed beside the old photograph Daniel had left. The date written above it read, October 14th, 20 years ago. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She began reading aloud. Today something happened that I don't think I'll ever forget. Emily saw a lonely man sitting outside Miller's bakery while we were walking home. He looked completely broken. She asked why he was crying. I told her that sometimes grown-ups carry pain they don't know how to share. Without saying another word, she took the last cinnamon roll we'd bought, walked straight over to him, and placed it in his hands. Emily's voice began to shake. Victoria listened without interrupting. Emily continued. The man tried to refuse. Emily smiled and said, My mummy says kindness always comes back when people need it most. Emily stopped reading. Those words, she remembered hearing them almost every day growing up. Her mother had always believed kindness was never wasted. She turned the page. Another entry had been written later that same evening. The handwriting looked hurried, almost emotional. When we got home, Emily asked if the man would ever smile again. I told her I hoped so. She looked at me and said, "Then let's pray for him tonight." Emily covered her mouth. She had no memory of saying those words, yet reading them now, it felt as though her mother's voice had returned to the room. Victoria quietly wiped a tear from her eye. Daniel always said he couldn't remember what anyone else said after the accident. She smiled softly. But he remembered every single word spoken by one little girl. Emily looked toward the apartment window. Rain had started falling again, just like that day. She reached deeper into the memory box. At the very bottom lay a small envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. It simply read, "For Emily, when you're ready." Her heart raced. "I've never seen this before." Victoria looked surprised. "Open it." Emily carefully unfolded the letter inside. There was only one page. "My darling Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to remind you of something very important. Never measure your life by what you own. Measure it by the people who smile because you were part of their story. You once gave a stranger your favorite cinnamon roll. You cried the whole way home because you thought you'd never taste another one." Emily laughed through her tears. She actually remembered that part. Her mother had baked cinnamon rolls together with her the very next morning. She kept reading. "One day that stranger may never remember your face. But I promise you, kindness has a way of finding its way home." Emily slowly lowered the letter. The room fell completely silent. Then, something slipped from inside the folded page, a small newspaper clipping. The paper had turned yellow with age. Across the front was a photograph of a much younger Daniel Whitmore standing outside a hospital. The headline read, "Young entrepreneur donates entire fortune to build children's recovery center." But what caught Emily's attention wasn't the headline. Someone, her mother, had circled one sentence in red ink. "Mr. Whitmore says his decision was inspired by the unexpected kindness of a little girl whose name he never learned." Emily's eyes widened. For years, Daniel had honored the memory of a child he couldn't find. And for years, Emily had never known she'd become part of his life's greatest decision. Just then, Victoria's phone vibrated sharply. She glanced at the screen. The color drained from her face. Emily immediately noticed. "What happened?" Victoria slowly looked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They found Daniel's car." Emily's heart stopped. "What about Daniel?" Victoria swallowed hard. "The car was abandoned, but there was no sign of him." Victoria lowered her phone slowly. The silence inside Emily's apartment became almost unbearable. "The police found Daniel's car," she repeated quietly. "It was parked less than 2 miles from Whitmore Manor." Emily's stomach tightened. "And Daniel?" Victoria shook her head. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No fingerprints except his own. It was as if he simply disappeared. Emily looked at the antique watch lying on the table, then at the handwritten letter. None of it made sense. "If he planned to disappear," she whispered, "why leave clues behind?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Because he wanted someone to follow them." An hour later, a black luxury sedan rolled through the iron gates of Whitmore Manor, one of the oldest private estates in Massachusetts. Emily had never seen anything like it. The estate stretched across acres of perfectly maintained gardens. Ancient oak trees lined the driveway. A fountain stood in front of a stone mansion whose windows glowed softly against the dark sky. It looked less like a home, and more like something preserved from another century. As the car stopped, 2 security guards opened the doors. Neither of them looked surprised to see Emily. Instead, they greeted her with quiet respect. "Good evening, Miss Carter." Emily exchanged a puzzled glance with Victoria. "Do they know who I am?" Victoria smiled faintly. "They were told to expect you." Inside the mansion, everything felt strangely untouched. The air carried the scent of old books and polished wood. Family portraits covered the walls. Some dated back more than 100 years. Emily noticed something unusual. Although the mansion displayed priceless artwork and rare antiques, there were almost no photographs of Daniel. Victoria noticed her looking. He never liked attention. Most people know his face from magazines. But this house, she smiled softly, was never built to impress strangers. They entered a large study overlooking the gardens. A fire burned quietly in the fireplace. On the desk sat dozens of neatly organized files. One chair remained slightly pulled back, as though someone had stood up only moments earlier. Emily's eyes landed on a leather notebook resting beside the desk lamp. Was this his office? Victoria nodded. It still is. Emily walked closer. Everything had been left exactly as it was. Reading glasses, half-finished tea, a fountain pen, an open notebook. She glanced at the final handwritten sentence. If she returns the watch, the sentence ended there. The page was blank. Emily looked at Victoria. He was writing about me. Victoria slowly nodded. Yes. Before Emily could ask another question, the study door opened. An elderly man entered. He looked to be in his late 70s. Silver hair, sharp blue eyes, perfect posture. Emily recognized him immediately. Arthur? The old gentleman smiled warmly. I had a feeling we'd meet again. Emily stared at him. You knew all along, Arthur nodded. Yes. You weren't looking for Daniel. You were looking for me, Arthur sighed. I was looking for the person Daniel had waited 20 years to find. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Then tell me the truth. Arthur slowly walked toward the fireplace. For several moments, he simply looked into the flames. Finally, he spoke. 20 years ago, after Daniel survived the darkest day of his life, he made 2 promises. Emily listened carefully. The first promise, he fulfilled. He built hospitals, funded schools, created charities. He wanted every child to have the future he believed he'd lost. Arthur paused. But the second promise, he never stopped trying to keep. Emily's voice was barely audible. What promise? Arthur turned toward her. He promised himself that one day he would find the little girl who reminded him that kindness still existed. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I never knew. He never wanted you to, Arthur replied gently. He believed kindness loses its beauty the moment it expects a reward. Arthur walked to a large wooden cabinet built into the wall. He removed an old brass key from his pocket. With a soft click, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a single wooden box, covered in dust, untouched for years. Arthur carried it carefully to the desk. This belongs to you. Emily frowned. It can't. I've never been here before. Arthur smiled. Not physically, but your story has. Emily slowly lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of items, newspaper clippings, old photographs, charity reports, children's drawings, letters from families Daniel had helped. Each one was carefully dated, each one marked with the same handwritten initials. E.C. Emily whispered, My initials, Arthur nodded. Every major decision Daniel made, he placed inside this box. Emily looked confused. But why? Arthur's answer left the room completely silent. Because every life he changed, he believed, was possible because one little girl handed him a cinnamon roll instead of walking past. Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She had spent years believing she was just an ordinary waitress struggling to pay rent. Without ever knowing it, one small act of kindness had inspired hospitals, scholarships, children's homes, medical research. Thousands, perhaps millions, of lives had been changed not because she was wealthy, not because she was powerful, but because, as a child, she chose kindness. Emily gently closed the wooden box. One question still remained. If Daniel wanted to thank me, why disappear now? Arthur's warm expression slowly faded. For the first time that evening, fear appeared in his eyes. He reached into his coat pocket, then silently placed a folded document on the desk. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, Last Will and Testament of Daniel Whitmore. Emily stared at it in disbelief. Her voice trembled. A will? Arthur nodded gravely. It was signed 3 days before he vanished. Emily looked at the final page. At the very bottom, beneath Daniel's unmistakable signature, was one sentence that made the blood drain from her face. If I cannot return, everything begins with Emily Carter. The room fell silent. Emily looked up slowly. What does that mean? Arthur met her eyes. It means, Emily, Daniel knew he was going to disappear. The study fell into complete silence. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the final page of Daniel Whitmore's will. The sentence echoed through her mind. If I cannot return, everything begins with Emily Carter. She slowly looked up at Arthur. What does he mean by, if I cannot return? Arthur sighed deeply, looking suddenly older than he had only moments before. There is something Daniel never wanted the public to know. Emily waited. Arthur walked toward the large window overlooking the gardens. For almost 3 years, Daniel had been fighting an aggressive heart condition. Emily's breath caught. Victoria lowered her eyes. He kept it completely private, she added quietly. The board of directors didn't know. The media didn't know. Even most of his employees believed he was perfectly healthy. Emily looked down at the untouched cup of tea still sitting on Daniel's desk. The soup, she whispered. He barely touched it. Victoria nodded. The medication affected his appetite. Emily suddenly remembered something else. The sadness in Daniel's eyes. The way he had stared through the restaurant window, as if he already knew something no one else did. Arthur carefully opened another drawer in Daniel's desk. Inside rested a small digital recorder. He picked it up. "He asked me to give this to you. Only if he never came back." Emily's hands trembled as Arthur pressed the play button. For a moment, only static filled the room. Then, Daniel's calm voice broke the silence. "Hello, Emily. If you're hearing this, then I wasn't given the chance to thank you in person." Emily felt tears immediately fill her eyes. "You probably think this story began when I left my watch in your restaurant. It didn't. It began 20 years ago, on a rainy afternoon, when a little girl gave a broken man her last cinnamon roll." Emily closed her eyes. The memory was no longer blurry. She could see everything: the rain, her mother's smile, Daniel sitting alone on the bench. Daniel continued, "People often say money changes lives. They're wrong. Money only magnifies the heart of the person holding it. What truly changes lives is kindness." Arthur quietly wiped away a tear. Even Victoria struggled to hide her emotions. "For years, I searched for the little girl who saved me, not because I wanted to repay her. Kindness can never be repaid. I searched because I wanted her to know that one small decision can echo through generations." Emily looked around the study. The charity reports, the photographs, the children's drawings, everything suddenly made sense. Daniel's voice became softer. "Every children's hospital we built, every scholarship we funded, every family we helped, began with one simple lesson. Someone believed I was worth saving." Emily could no longer stop crying. She had spent years believing she had accomplished nothing extraordinary, yet one innocent act of kindness had inspired a lifetime of compassion. The recording continued. "If I am gone, I have only one final request. Please don't let Whitmore Foundation become another corporation chasing numbers. Let it continue chasing people, the lonely, the forgotten, the children who believe no one sees them. Promise me that kindness will always come before profit." The recording ended with a long pause. Then Daniel spoke one final sentence. "Thank you for giving me back my time." The room fell silent. No one spoke, no one moved, only the crackling fire filled the study. Several weeks later, the mystery surrounding Daniel Whitmore finally came to an end. His private aircraft had suffered a mechanical failure during an emergency medical flight over the North Atlantic. Rescue teams searched tirelessly. Although parts of the aircraft were recovered, Daniel himself was never found. The world mourned the loss of one of its greatest philanthropists. News channels remembered him as a billionaire. Business magazines called him a visionary. World leaders praised his generosity. But Emily remembered him differently. She remembered a lonely man, sitting quietly by a restaurant window, eating soup on a rainy evening. 3 months later, Harbor Street Bistro looked exactly as it always had. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Customers laughed, plates clinked, life moved forward. Emily still worked there, not because she needed the money, because she loved serving people. One afternoon, a young waitress accidentally dropped an entire tray of drinks onto the floor. The restaurant fell silent. The girl's face turned pale. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Before anyone could complain, Emily knelt beside her, smiled, and quietly began helping her clean the mess. No one's first mistake defines them. The young waitress looked at her with grateful eyes. "Thank you," Emily smiled. "Someone once taught me that kindness always finds its way home." That evening, Emily walked to the community center where she had volunteered for years. Only now, a new sign stood above the entrance. The Daniel Whitmore House of Hope inside, children laughed while volunteers served warm meals. Families found shelter. Students received free tutoring. No cameras, no reporters, just people helping people. Exactly as Daniel would have wanted. Before leaving, Emily placed the antique watch inside a small glass display case in the entrance hall. Beneath it rested a simple plaque. It read, "This watch reminds us that time is precious, but kindness is timeless. One small act of compassion can change a single life, and that life may change thousands more." Emily looked at the watch one last time. She smiled softly. For the first time in many years, it no longer looked like something that had been lost. It looked like something that had finally come home. Most people believe the biggest moments in life happen under bright lights, in crowded rooms, or after great achievements. But sometimes, the moment that changes the world is almost invisible. A child sharing her last cinnamon roll. A waitress choosing honesty over opportunity. A stranger deciding to care. You'll probably never know how far your kindness will travel. You may never meet the people whose lives are changed because of one small decision you made today. But somewhere, someone's future may begin with your compassion, because wealth can build buildings, power can change laws, but only kindness has the power to change hearts. And as Daniel Whitmore discovered, time may move forward, but true kindness always finds its way home.